Hello, hello. This is your host, Sheraz Ahmed, ready to kick off another bite-sized episode of the Crypto Valley Association podcast. Let's discover together the growing trends of this fast-moving space and try to shed some light on the mysteries it contains. We are joined by Frederik Gregaard, the recently appointed CEO of the Cardano Foundation, an independent standards body that oversees and supervises the advancement of Cardano, one of the leading decentralized public blockchains. So let's dive straight into the hidden world of enterprise adoption. Frederik, thank you for joining us. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well.
Awesome. Well, then let's dive straight in. Why don't you tell us how you first found out about blockchain technology and what got you first involved within this space?
Sure, very happy to do so. It's a bit of a boring story, right? But essentially, I'm a technology banker. So I'm coming from building and implementing technology for banks, asset managers, wealth managers, large treasuries, and so forth. And my big passion in the last 15 to 20 years has always been around bringing trust back into banking and capital markets. At this part, somebody always starts laughing in the audience, or probably somebody on the podcast will have a good laugh. Because how do you actually do that? So I've been living through the financial crisis. I've been on a trading floor when everything went south and you took orders on post-its. And I've seen some of the impact we've done in banking. And I fully believe that we need the function of banking. We need the function of finance. From the t-shirt we're wearing to the watch we're wearing, everything is embedded in finance. And I think if you kind of think about it for a while, right, it's something like, it goes along the lines like this, right? So the fundamental currency of commerce is not the US dollar or the Swiss franc, it's actually trust. And how do we bring trust back into the financial system? To do that, we really need to touch the trust equation. So when I was looking at it from a banking side and Bitcoin came around and the first couple of digital assets, I was really heavily pushing towards and saying, I want these companies as my clients. I want them in my bank. I want to service them. I want to start building infrastructure around that. And I was basically not allowed to do that. My compliance department straight away said, no, this doesn't work. They're surely gray listed. There was different, soft opinions out saying that these kind of companies were, only for money laundering or for terrorism or the Silk Road and all of those things. But I felt there was a deeper thing behind it. So I was, started pushing for it. I lost the fight in the bank. I tried to do what I could around the ecosystem and around the early days to support with my knowledge. And then first, actually, when I then joined PwC later, to really push towards having an army of change makers. So how do you take 250,000 employees and try to really solve this hard problem about trust in capital markets and banking? It was very clear at that time that blockchain, distributed ledger technology, and so forth is a part of the solution. So somehow I just, kind of waded straight into it by looking at what was the real problem. And suddenly I discovered a technology who could or had the potential to actually mitigate some of that and build some rails and some infrastructure, which is actually how it was supposed to be if we had this kind of opportunity maybe 50 years ago.
Thank you for that. I'm glad you've kept the faith in this technology. And so if we move on to Cardano now, firstly, well, congratulations for being appointed as the first Chief Executive Officer of the Cardano Foundation. It's a round of applause. And maybe you can give our audience an insight into what the Cardano Foundation is about and why you decided to join.
Sure. So the Cardano Foundation is an independent non-for-profit organization that oversees and supervises the advancement of the Cardano ecosystem. So what does that really mean? So there's a lot of third generation DLT projects out there. And I think we need them all. We probably need even more than the ones who's already out there working on it. And the first and second generation who's upgrading right now, we definitely also need them because the problem we're solving is huge. And it's not just about financial services, even though I'm so embedded in it. So the governance structures of Cardano is slightly different than many of the other projects. And there's actually 3 entities around the project who makes a huge effort here. So I just explained a little bit about what we do in the Cardano Foundation, but then there's also our brothers in Out Hong Kong Limited, so IOHK. And these guys are actually building the first version of the technology stack. And then there is Imurgo, who's basically, tasked upon how do we drive a lot of the adoption, and how do we drive a lot of use cases, and how do we basically bring it out to the masses. So there's like a trinity here of companies who's actually working towards the same vision or towards the same purpose. And what I'm hoping for, or what I'm going to push very hard for, is that this is not just going to be a trinity. We're going to see a huge ecosystem of institutional or product development companies and other companies joining this ecosystem, not just as users on the protocol, but also as shapers of it. So in short, what you can say is that the Cardano Foundation's purpose is to ensure that we are building principal systems for generations to come. And that means that we're not trying to build something who's going to have a huge adoption and make an impact in just our generation, but we want to build infrastructure for the next generations to come. So they have a place where they can build applications, they can do transactions, we can give access to people who don't have access to financial services today, and so forth in the future. It's a big task, and there's a lot of ethical problems in there. There's a lot of governance problems in there. There's a lot of things who on the short term might seem as being, not the right way to go, because it's not about pumping any kind of token, but it's really about ensuring that there's sufficient trust and we take the right choices, that people will think about this as one of the initial foundational layers of technologies the future to build on.
And so is there a USP, a unique selling point that really attracted you towards Cardano instead of another cryptocurrency company that's developing something similar?
Oh, that's a very good question. So I believe that we need a new architecture of the entire internet, and perhaps even a new architecture of the whole financial system of the world economy. And when I was looking, as you know, I'm only going to take over this role in the future, right? So when I'm looking at it from my PwC eyes and looking at it and thinking about, how do we, what kind of protocols does my institutional clients want, my central banking clients, my tier 1 or tier 2 banking clients, or the asset managers who is, building tokens and doing portfolios on it. To be honest, it's very hard to kind of to find that one project who stands out from the rest of them when you look into the open projects. So when you don't look at the centralized change, but really look at the public change. And that's probably because a lot of these things have not been done before. We got Ethereum and we got Bitcoin who really rocked the world and really, showed us what's actually possible. But there was a lot of scalability problems. There was a lot of issues in terms of sustainability, about environment, about consensus algorithms, and so forth. And now I see, maybe 10 projects who's doing really, who's pushing forward with each of their versions around a third generation blockchain technology. And what I really think that Cardano does really well is that they have a really strong security architecture that allows you to keep your identity to yourself, but also allows you to basically be able to prove to anybody, whether that being the prosecutor or a lawyer or a judge or whoever that might be, that you have an immutable record to document your behavior. And when you think about that in banking sense, you don't actually have, as a consumer or as an enterprise, any way of proving your behavior, transaction behavior at all. That's all stored in centralized third-party intermediaries today, right? So actually the bank will have your transaction history and you can print that out, and due to them being audited and so forth, you have that. But I think this is one of the main things that blockchain will allow us to do. And when I look at the architecture of Cardano and how they actually have split the different layers and connected that, I thought they're onto something. And the academic research the Cardano Foundation has done and basically taking a step back and not just done a hard fork on Ethereum or something like that, but they took a step back and said, how do we solve these things, and went into the research. I thought that was very appealing for me. Now, the issue obviously is when you're coming from research and, bringing foundational research out into, the masses and the public, that normally takes you 20 years. And Cardano is trying to do that within 5 to 6 years. That's alone is quite groundbreaking. But I like the architecture behind Cardano, but I also like the architecture among many of the other peers. But I think there's something around the vision combined with the architecture towards the use cases and where they have not cut corners, which I think is truly unique about Cardano. And I'm very much looking forward to Cardano actually launching its full potential and its full product, so we can start actually testing that in the enterprise environment, because we are one of the projects who does not have the full-fledged tech stack available out there yet.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, within your role as a newly appointed CEO, I mean, you'll have a lot of impact within this, and maybe you can tell us a little bit more. How do you plan on spearheading enterprise adoption within Cardano?
Sure. So I think about it a little bit in the area of that trust is probably the only legal performance enhancing drug out there. Whenever there is trust in people, in communities, in companies, in societies, in governments, good things tend to happen. And I think one of the things I'm really going to focus on a lot is that, we are not just a project, which is, who's launching and then that's it. And then, it went really well and we got some adoption. Now we are looking at how can we stay around for the next 50 to 100 years. And when you think about that, then you have to really start thinking about merging the existing way we mitigate trust, the manufactured trust as we do it today. Because the whole financial system, including the whole commerce system today, is actually living on manufactured trust. So we basically, have all these intermediaries from the big four to the lawyers to the whole systems who's basically manufacturing the trust, but it doesn't bring us to abundant trust. And in that last part, we have a huge gap who's emerging, and this gap is emerging based on all the new technologies, whether that is drones or the Uber reviews or the centralized way we're using AI to change our behavior. Gradually, we don't really feel it ourselves. It's slight movements, it's gradual movements what's happening, right? And I think that's exactly where things starting to get really interesting. So I'm going to apply a good chunk of what we do in the traditional manufactured trust world, look into what can we do by using technology. So instead of saying we just need a lot of auditors coming in and clocking hours and do their spot checks, which they do, by the way, really well, right? We should not do spot checks anymore. We should not. Why would we put people in to control things which is billions of lines of code? There we should use technology. So I would use the existing frameworks of the manufactured trust systems to go in and build trust around that. I would work with the community, the huge Cardano community, around how do we ensure that the community trusts the ecosystem. How do we build that ecosystem? By being very communicative. I believe in brutal honesty. It's about if you say the truth and you say the truth every single time where you are allowed to say the truth, then in the end good things happens, right? Because it might not be what people want to hear, right? But if that is the state where you are, then you're also asking for help, and there's a huge community who's willing to help. And then last but not least, I think the enterprise community, what they're looking for is assurance that whatever technology stack they will be choosing, that this is also around in 10 years time in the same format, and in 20 years time in the same format. Because let's face it, most of the large institutions today, when they choose a technology stack, they will stay with that technology stack for decades. And obviously that's not exactly how we look at the bleeding edge of technology today. We're thinking about when we change apps every single day, maybe, right? We download a new app every week and try things out. Well, if you're responsible for a whole country's monetary supply and stability, you don't just change system because you want to try something new. You take something who's tested, validated, and it's working, and not doing a funny update. So therefore, one of the things which I also really find appealing and where we have to do a lot of work is basically around the governance system of Cardano, which is being developed right now. I'm going to launch in the new year. And I think there I'm going to also have a big saying and also have a big look in there to ensure that fits within also what institutions want from us. So it's not just about features. It's not just about, can we comply with it? What is the minimal technology needs by the company that they can work with us, right? It's also around the whole trust equation.
Okay, that was very, very interesting. And you spoke a little bit about the skepticism that your peers, your colleagues, when you're in the traditional side of things, had towards blockchain technology, cryptocurrencies. Maybe you can tell us a little bit of what types of encouragement you're looking to provide to these traditional players to build atop of Cardano, and is there a level of education that needs to be put in place in order to do this?
Yeah, so I remember the first time I had to explain, a room full of senior auditors why blockchain, in this case it was Bitcoin, was something you have to pay attention to. I think one of the biggest issues we have with some of the new technologies like AI and like DLT-based and DLT-derived technologies is it's actually extremely hard to explain. It's really hard to say, why is this different than what we see with cloud computing today. And I am confident that we need to increase the level of understanding by not just the auditors and the governments and the central banks. And that's been actually happening a lot in the last 4 or 5 years. And also we've seen a lot of like large projects coming in, and suddenly all the regulators are coming together to understand, this multinational world-dominating company who's issuing something who looks like a blockchain, and they want to issue cryptocurrencies, and everybody, 1/5 of the world's population will be able to settle and clear with that. What does that actually mean, and so on? So I think a lot of this is happening already today, and I'm already participating in that, both in talks with governments and controlling bodies. But I think the other part will then be what's specific around Cardano or other of the projects, because all of our consensus algorithms, even though they maybe fall under 1 or 2 buckets, they work very differently. What does it mean in terms of how does it fit into FATF? How does it fit into, the United Nations sustainability goals? How does it fit into the current regulation? How do we ensure that, if you as a company choose to build on Cardano, which is an open project, so anybody will be able to pick that up and do a fork of that, right? And continue on that if they suddenly weaponize, drones, and the foundation or the architecture of how to control that is actually is our blockchain. What does that mean? Does that mean that this large enterprise who has, multiple thousands of employees and maybe millions of clients, that they're suddenly being associated with something like that, right? So I think there's a lot of work to be done around this new way of thinking on business models, right? And I don't have a full answer to that, but one of the things is really to continue on the educational path, to continue to bring to people's attention what is the differences between centralized large companies who is controlling and kind of capturing your business and your architecture towards these open blockchain projects where they're always saying, what about the security? And I'm saying, yeah, but security is not a procedure or mechanism. It's an architecture. Blockchain and DLT and the derived technologies will be coming from DLT will start by defining the ground state, the ultimate non-random reality. And the ground state is you. So your private key is a bit like your DNA identity, and will allow you, as I said before, to basically be able to also prove that you didn't do certain things without actually having to ask big centralized organizations to speak on behalf of you and prove that you didn't do that. And there's obviously a little bit of a problem here when you have to go and ask other people to speak your case where there might not be an incentive to do so, or might not be surety that they can do that, because how much are they, how much of you do they truly know, right? They probably know a lot more than they actually is willing to say, right? But how much are they willing to fight for the individual?
Probably.
I think this is where it's going to get really interesting, right? And in certain ways, I think the ultimate resource is the individual, and blockchain will power the individuals in a way where we see today that the individuals are not empowered anymore. We are what is being sold, right? We are kind of the commodity in the equation of today. I think it's going to be a fundamental change we're seeing, and that's why I'm also calling out to all of the peers of Cardano, but also the big fours and all of the central players. I mean, this is a totally new way of looking at architecture. It's going to probably bring us together in a way we've not been able to do. Think about what COVID-19 actually did is it brought us 5 or 6 years of digital adoption in half a year, right? So everybody was suddenly able to do video calls, and people could use their e-banking tool where they normally went to the cashier, and people were buying groceries online, and people were filling out documents, and we got all of this adoption. But we we didn't really change the underlying architecture of how that works. And that is kind of the empowerment we'll be looking for. And that's why these open projects are going to be so big. But it's going to be a paradigm shift in how we think around security, because normally we like security to be in a centralized place. We like to put that vault in the Swiss mountains where the data centers are, and kick them like we're kicking out the tires of our car before we drive it out on the street to see, get that feeling that it works, right? Yes. Now suddenly security lies in decentralized, distributed codes and lines and millions of lines of codes, and how do we understand those, right? That's why it's a larger ecosystem. I think it's really important that we stand together, not just the new and the old world, but the whole world. We're going to bring things where we actually can work together across our cultures, across our differences, and we can send, instead of the centralized power we see among certain companies and nation states, that we can decentralize that. I mean, how great would it not be that we would actually have surety around how many people who actually have COVID-19 from different countries and the neighboring countries, and how the methods are and so on, that we actually can trust each other's data. And I think that's what we're going to see here with some of these open projects. We can do that in the future.
Yeah, maybe it would definitely help a lot. And in a dream world, it would be true. And maybe if we continue on that tangent of openness, and you described how the repercussions of if there were a fork were to occur of the Cardano blockchain, and I know you have quite some thoughts about the whole public vs private blockchains. Would you like to comment on that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So being originally coming from investment banking and trading and so on, for me, security was very much around that your counterpart, and exactly how the infrastructure is, and exactly down to the last detail about how things works over the APIs and what is the counterpart relationship and so forth. And I think that's why we are seeing, if we take that a bit forward, we see that it's the centralized or the private blockchains who's getting adoption right now. But if you think about blockchain and what it truly does, in a private blockchain, we won't get that different security architecture I'm speaking about. We won't get all the advantages. We won't be able to take the existing manufactured trust levels and start closing the trust gap we are seeing emerging right now by them, because we are just changing a little bit on how we structure data. And yes, it might work, but there might be like thousands of other ways of getting that to work. And let's face it, a lot of the implementations we've seen in the centralized field could have been done in another technology stack, maybe cheaper or even faster as well. But in the public side, I feel that if you have a really good principal system, which is publicly available under scrutiny from the whole world, so everybody can go in and actually see what's happening and actually be part of either developing it or claiming a bounty or maybe even exploiting it, so we can get those security loopholes closed. You can always build a side chain on that which is closed, right? So you can always you're kind of ensured that you have as many eyes as possible on it. And if you then basically derive the incentive structure that people actually do go in and check your code, and people do go in and actually look at your architecture, you will have a beautiful opportunity of not having just the world's leading experts to basically validate you, but you will have, if they have willingness, if they have capabilities to do so. And that's why I really liked your point about education before, that they're able to go in and check this, and able to go in and look at this. And then suddenly we're actually bringing people together, because we're using the fully distributed power of the human society and their brain power, or at least have the opportunity to do so, to check what you're doing and to improve what you're doing. And then you can always have a centralized, part on that. And I think that's one of the parts which is really appealing for me with the Cardano project, is that there's so much interoperability. So there's so much focus on what you will also see coming out here, and there will be some announcements in the next couple of months around some really, really fantastic interoperability around not just DeFi, but also how to get back from centralized blockchains into the public blockchain, or even also interoperability with Ethereum and so on. These kind of announcements is super important for me, because it shows a part of the vision around the project that is not about one one takes world domination.
Mm-hmm.
It's about we need multiple systems to be the foundation for a brand new infrastructure of the world, which is coming faster and faster, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
Some people say happily, but I think some of the accelerators is like the global pandemic we're seeing now and so forth, right? So it's been speeding up quite a lot.
Yes, no, I see that definitely. And so as we slowly reach the end of this episode, Frederik, where do you see the future of the blockchain space?
I think for the blockchain space to really come to its potential, what we will see on the short term is that we will see a range of the third generation blockchains succeeding and being able to prove that they tackled, the very famous problems we have around the first and second generation of blockchains.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say we will see a whole new market around user experience. So, the blockchains we have today, the user experience is not very good. But for them to really scale and to go out there, we need them. And I'm not talking about, like when we say user experience, we're speaking only about private persons. Can you work with it? Can you work with the wallet? Because then you're already down into the crypto coin and crypto asset space, right? And the wallet is just a normal piece of technology, right? And it's nothing to do really with blockchain. It might, have deep roots and touch blockchain and hold assets, right? Now, what I'm speaking about, how do we get much more traction in the developer community? How do we get much more traction in the enterprise developer community? How do we ensure that the CISOs of the world and feel comfortable about open projects? And to do that, we need to give them tools to work with, where they can play around with the blockchain and the underlying ledgers and the underlying consensuses and the underlying security architecture of it, that they start to understand it, but can also feed back to us on how it works, and that they're also incentivized to do so. So I think there's going to be a big push towards enterprise user experiences and how to actually get engaged with this. And then I think, obviously on the longer term, we're going to, really have a focus on also environmental friendly and secure solutions, like what we have with Shelly, but others have other things, right? We're going to see much more regulatory certainty. So you probably noticed that the Swiss government just came out with another great news around how they look at it and brought certainty into at least the Swiss space, right? But we've also seen that here lately that the US has brought some certainty out around cryptocurrencies and other things, right? So we will see much more certainty, and the European Union is also working on certainty, right? And then I really truly hope that compared to when we looked at where the internet and how the internet developed, where we saw like this huge army of weekend soldiers sitting and coding and developing, that this is all now being centralized in a very few companies and also have centralized power, really. I really hope, and I'm going to do everything I can to really fight towards it, that we are going to bring much more power to the edges and allow much more, not just in financial services where the SMEs will get access to financial services they wouldn't have access to before due to, the old financial world, but also the small banks and so forth. That they get access to these rails, which normally would only be, basically for the tier one players, right? So I'm hoping we can, push power to the edges and so on, but it's going to be a large battle where it might be that it's just going to be swallowed up, right? We will do everything we can to make the world a bit better and to empower the individual as well, to build businesses and thrive on these things, have access to them.
Yes, well, here's to a better world. And thank you so much, Frederik, for those valuable insights. Do you have anything else you'd like to share with our audience today?
No, just keep watching the space. If you want to be a part of the Cardano project, reach out to our community managers and follow us. We would love to interact with any enterprises or anybody who has a valuable feedback or good opinion, but most preferable people who want to build on what we already have launched. And then, as said before, I'm not in the chair yet, so I'm very much looking forward to actually being in the chair sooner than later. And so we can get some traction, huh?
Yes.
I think it's going to be super exciting, and there's a lot of work waiting to happen. But if we do this right, is going to be to the benefit of all humanity. And I think that's fantastic that I'm so lucky to be able to be in a project where I can say that the hours I'm spending might actually help humanity as such.
Yes, well, I truly hope so. And good luck to you within that role, Frederik. And to all of you out there, well, there you have it, a little bit more about enterprise adoption from the Cardano Foundation. And if you enjoyed this conversation, feel free to check out more on our website, cryptovalley.swiss, where we host plenty of events, educational content, and even provide information on how you can join our growing community. So thanks again, Frederik, for joining us. Stay tuned, stay safe, and until next time from the Crypto Valley in Switzerland.